The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago. Closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
Last year, more than 50 schools were shut down in Chicago, partly due to declining enrollment. But there are some schools in Chicago that are now overcrowded and understaffed, and parents are demanding action. That's the focus of our discussion on today's edition of The Professors. Joining us to talk about school overcrowding in Chicago are Troy LaRaviere, principal at Blaine Elementary School; Tony Porfirio, chairman of the local school council at Blaine; Carolyn Schoenberger, attorney and professor at Harold Washington College; and Dr. Nick Panamitros, attorney and professor at Kennedy King College, UIC, and Harper College. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, so 50 schools closed in Chicago, but you guys in your school are experiencing overcrowding. What's happening at Blaine Elementary specifically? Tell us what's happening around the overcrowding issue, please.
Let you give the overview.
Well, it's basically a straight population issue. Every neighborhood school has boundaries, and over the last 10 years has been just an unbelievable trend of families moving into our neighborhood. It was kind of a single neighborhood, and it's become much more of a family neighborhood. And just within a mile of our school, there's about 7,000 kids under 5 years old. Wow. So it's already a problem at our school. We're already over capacity. We're at 138% capacity, and it's only going to get incrementally worse.
So what are the current numbers, and what is the capacity, just by numbers? The percentage.
Our school's built for about 650, and there's 950.
Okay. And so you are the principal at Blaine Elementary. How does that impact student learning?
Well, one of the things that the overcrowding does is it limits the amount of classrooms that we have to operate with. So you get to a point where you're down to your last classroom, you've used it. And so when you have, let's say, 90 students in a particular grade level, you go up to 110, you need another classroom.
Okay, all right.
We don't have that other classroom, and so it basically leads to large classrooms.
Okay, so what happens now then? So are you just taking the additional students and putting them within current existing classes, or are you sort of doing makeshift classrooms? How is that working right now?
And so right now it's leading to large class sizes.
Okay.
And most of the research on class size has shown that the larger the class size, the more likely there will be a detrimental effect to student learning. You know, at Blaine, we've done some things to mitigate that because of our population, in terms of parents and their commitment to their students' learning and the resources that they have to commit to it. We've been able to hire intervention specialists who work with the teachers in those classrooms that have large class sizes to ensure that those students who would normally get lost in a larger class size because the teacher can't give them that individualized attention or is less likely to do so. They work with those students, but that's not, that's not replicable across the city. You know, a Mollison or a Carter on the south side can't raise that kind of money. A Johnson or Tilton on the west side can't raise that kind of money. And it's also not good public policy because they shouldn't have to raise that money in the first place. They've already paid with their property taxes. Now we're asking them to pay twice.
So we're talking about some issues of poverty around the city and inequality, which we'll get into, trust me. We love that topic on this show. But what I want to talk about in general, so there's 78 overcrowded schools. Maybe Carolyn or Nick, why don't you guys hop into the conversation? Explain to us why is this happening in Chicago, and how big of a problem is it?
Just in my neighborhood, Lincoln Park, we moved in when we were young urban professionals. Many people moved out, but many of us stayed. We had children, and people loved coming to Lincoln Park. There were great restaurants and great theaters. It's still a great place to live, but more children ended up going to the public schools, and we have a situation with Lincoln Elementary where, again, we have an overcrowding situation, which they have resolved by increasing the size of their building up. So I think a lot of it comes from the fact that more people are moving into the city or staying in the city and having families.
So you guys have a unique situation in Lincoln Park because you are getting a $20 million building annex, right? And in Lincoln Park High School, and a lot of people in the city are having a problem with that because Lincoln Park is not one of the top overcrowded schools in the city.
No, when I refer to overcrowding, I'm talking about
the elementary
Lincoln
schools?
Elementary School,
Okay.
where next door Children's Memorial was
Got you.
located.
Okay, got you.
But in order to
Okay.
maximize the amount of money that can be earned, instead of building a new school in the new area, they are building onto the
Okay, got you.
existing site.
Okay.
So,
I'd like to,
Yeah, so but both are happening, if that makes sense. So it's happening at the school, at the elementary and the high school as well.
yeah, I'd like to ask Troy, at his school, you were saying that you're at 950 where you should be normally at 650. Is this just a short-term problem, or is if every year you have an enrollment at 950, are they making any kind of plans to accommodate the 950 with a smaller, teacher-student ratio?
And so what it's done is put us in a position, it's not a short-term problem, it's put us in a position of having to make a lot of hard decisions and to take something away from someone in order to give something to someone else. For example, we've had to take away our pre-K classrooms. Over the past 2 years, we've had to eliminate 4 pre-K classrooms, and that's two half days per classrooms, and so that's 8 pre-K programs we've had to eliminate to make room and space for the students coming into Blaine. And so that severely hampers our ability to give, that's 160 students who do not have access now to the early literacy skills that we would have attempted to cultivate in them so that they can be ready for kindergarten. We cannot do that with those 160 students.
Okay, let me say this though, and I want to, this is a good conversation and we're going to sort of talk about, I think, your experiences and what's happening in the city, but let me, I think, throw something out there that may be a little bit more controversial in this conversation. I live on the South Side, and I live in a community that where there have been a number of school closings recently. So there are 50 school closings, we know about this. So when I hear the folks talking on the north side, they're saying, well, our schools are too crowded, and they're telling me on my side of town that my schools they're underutilized. So I have to say, and I probably share the sentiment of many probably South Side parents, that it may be less difficult to be empathetic, if you will, about schools that are overcrowded when they're closing our schools down because they're underutilized. So what's happening here? Because I can tell you that what I see happening is that parents are really voting with their feet. And they're moving to communities and moving to neighborhoods where the schools are good, and that's that. So for me, this is a greater question of why is it that they're running from certain schools and running to other schools, and if we just add to those schools and close these down, that problem doesn't really change, does it? So what's the greater issue?
No, it doesn't change. Unfortunately, a lot of the schools that are closing, the plan to move the students to other schools created a lot of controversy because there were fears for safety. Building on to Lincoln School is not going to solve the problem that some neighborhoods are dangerous and people want to go to schools where their kids can walk around and not be shot. So I think addressing the issues of poverty, addressing the issues that every neighborhood should be a safe neighborhood, I think will also help deal with the school situation.
Okay, now you mentioned the violence issue, which I think we need to hop into, but go ahead, you're gonna respond on this.
So you mentioned the idea of being empathetic. I think we all have to be empathetic to each other. I'm in a unique position where I grew up on the South Side. I live on the South Side. My son goes to a South Side school. I work at a North Side school, and I see the problems on both ends. And the problem on both ends, it always goes back to funding on the city level and at the state level. And it is us collectively as North Side and South Side parents and community members and teachers who have to advocate on a citywide and a statewide level to our politicians so that they can correct the inadequate funding that leads to situations like overcrowded schools and the inability to deal with them, or having to shut down schools.
And that's where, to follow up what I was going to ask you before, this concept of townships and certain areas having more funds than other areas, and then population differences in student population. Is your problem a physical structure problem, or is it a financial problem that you're having with the overcrowding?
I'd say both. The physical structure
100%.
we have is not adequate, and we need finances to correct
hire
that
new
problem.
teachers and that sort of thing, right?
In our situation also, if there was a school with 50% enrollment with 4 blocks away, maybe there would be a way to use those 2 facilities and join them. That's not the case. There's other schools in our neighborhood are also at an extremely high capacity. There's really nowhere to go. Every parent's going to try to move or put their kids into the best school that they can do it. And if everyone had the means to move into this, they will. And so I don't know what the answer is to this, but this is not from a parent point of view, from somebody who's involved in the council. Our school is succeeding. It's successful.
Sure.
If you're going to invest,
Okay.
why wouldn't you invest it?
So you say that you don't have an answer, and I do have an answer, okay? And that answer is, as I've said 100 times on our show, is empowering parents with the financial resources to send their kids to whatever school works for them. It really angers me in this conversation, and with all due respect, Carolyn, about the issue of violence, I understand why parents feel that, but the reality is that some of these communities, they have a bad rap in terms of violence. I mean, I live in a community that people would probably be afraid of, but I've never had anything happen to me in the 10 years I've been living in that community.
That's great.
And so what I'm suggesting, well, my car was broken into once, and they stole my Michael Jackson CDs, which was actually a very bad thing, by the way. I was very upset about that. But in reality, when you look at these disparities, people do feel that way. But the other issue is that on top of that, the schools are not, I mean, we've got, funding issues, we've got teaching issues, we've got, resource issues. These schools are really not very well invested in. So having said all of that, why can't we either empower parents to send their kids where they need to go, or empower these local schools or do both, so that all schools people can feel great about sending their kids to?
Well, that sounds great, and it's a wonderful plan that I don't think there could be anyone who would not support that. So how do you go about it?
I know a lot of people don't support it, and I'm going to tell you right now, in Indiana, they have put a voucher program together where the parents of low-income kids can take their kids to any school they want. So there are a lot of people that are blocking that in this state.
But would that mean that someone could go to Blaine? Someone with a voucher?
They would be able to go to Blaine, they'd be able to go to local Catholic school, they'd be able to go to
But that
any
would add
school
to
if
the
they want
problem.
to.
That would add to
because
the
what happens
problem.
is you'd have aggregation of maybe certain areas,
No.
overpopulation.
We have overpopulation now with no vouchers. It's a market thing. Listen, I work in the artistic community, right? And so I work at some dance studios, that sort of thing. We don't have that problem in dance studios, okay? They don't have that problem in why? Because the school has a problem. If too many people, guess what they do? They open up another one. Then they open up another one, and the parents vote with their feet. And so in education, I think we're trying to work against the market on some level, which on some level we should. But why can't we open up? And even with the charter school issue, I mean, people are upset about charter schools. Charter schools are, I believe, are providing some level of options, even though they're not unbelievably
I still
popular.
don't understand how having a voucher would enable someone to send their children to schools that already have 300 more students, and I'd have to.
As a parent who has a school 3 blocks from his house, I don't want the option of having a voucher to send my son across town. I want to make the school in my community a great school.
And to her point, we've been doing that for 50, 60 years.
We have not been doing that at all.
No, we've been talking about doing it. What I'm saying is, as a parent who has private schools 10 minutes from my house, I'd love the option to be able to send my kids there if I could afford it. But the reality is that people who can afford better do better in the system. We've got to try every solution that we can to equalize the playing field.
But the problem with vouchers is that they take money that could be used to make my neighborhood school a great school away.
They give the money to the parent where it belongs in the first place.
And then that money is taken away from that neighborhood school and goes to
if
wherever
the parent
I take
chooses
that child.
But if the parent chooses to stay in the local school, then the money stays right there. And then
That's a big if.
Yeah, because the school needs to prove itself that the parent want to come there.
And so if I had a problem with, let's say, the level of policing in my community, if I didn't think I was protected to the level that I need to be protected, would it be good public policy for me to then ask the state or the city for the money that the tax contribution that I've contributed toward the police force so that I can hire my own security.
No, it would be the same thing. It's the same thing as Section 8. It's not, that's not, we're talking about apples and oranges.
Well,
Section 8 is the same thing. If I get a voucher to Section 8, I can move out of a bad community into a good community.
That concept with a township system that we have it's too hodgepodge. I think that you'd have to have just a statewide property tax, one kind of flat tax, and then afterwards be able to do something like what you're talking about, because he addresses a very good issue that you can't have separation, but then having people taking money and then moving out of an area. It just doesn't work.
And there's two things there. Like, of course you want your child to go in your neighborhood. Your neighborhood school should be a good choice. Of course, that's what everybody wants to have happen. Something that our school got a lot of attention at the end of the year because last year we did not approve our budget. So our LSC got this, and this is a legal question that we're pursuing for the next possible year. How much legal ground does a local school council have? But here's the point that I'm trying to make is that we came up with a credo, and it was something simple. If something is a priority to you, what does that mean? And if something is a priority, that means that you put your energy and your resources toward that. And everyone says education is a priority. Yeah. I guarantee you, if we look at the funding model, we know that's not true. But in our case, right now, if we put more funding in, there's just the amount of people in our neighborhood. There's just that amount of people. We could build another school over there and move some people over here. We could put more buildings, but we have to do something. What we're finding is we've shown these numbers. We didn't make them up, and it didn't take very many people. They crunched the numbers very specifically in the population trends. Like, this is happening, but nothing is being done about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, are there other options? I'm not familiar with Blaine School, but like Lincoln School, suddenly there was a lot of property opened up, and they chose not to build a new school there. Do you have the option of renting a location, like an annex or something like that?
There isn't. That is something that, like we were talking about, there was a great opportunity there at Lincoln, and that could be one of the reasons why it was maybe bumped on the list. That doesn't come along that often. There is no option. The closest option we have at Blaine is we had a kind of poorly constructed annex. We could possibly, our plan was that we have some parents who are planners and architects, and they actually drew an entire plan up. It would be to build that annex.
And there's obviously a huge cost
100%
associated with that
100%.
How about some of the schools in the area? Are they able to pick up some of the slack?
Slightly.
And have you done anything to see if that can be made to happen?
That's not going to work because
parents want to go to Blaine.
Well, that's the first thing. That's the first thing. So the real estate market in that area, if you look at any of the realtor signs, it says this house is in the Blaine school attendance area. Like the brochures, house in Blaine school. People buy property and pick that specific location to put their kids in Blaine. And so they're not going to accept anything other than Blaine.
So it's the quality of the school then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a good thing.
But the other schools in our area are good quality schools too. Yeah. I don't think that the quality, I really believe in what we're doing at our school, and it's going up, but those schools aren't at 40% attendance. Yeah. They're at 91, and they're having the exact same thing that's happening to us is happening to them.
They're just a step behind you.
Oh, one step.
Yeah. I want to transition the conversation a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about overcrowded classrooms as well, because I know you mentioned this in terms of your school, which I think is a very important point. It's interesting because at the national level, overcrowding has actually gone down from the 60s, if it was. So in the 60s, the average school had 29 kids. The average high school had 28 kids. And the average elementary school now at 20, and then 23 for the high schools. All of that trend was going down until about 2008. And then the recession hit. And when the recession hit, now the class size start to get bigger because we're cutting budgets and that sort of thing. So the question I have, Florida, they have a cap on the number of kids you could have in a classroom in their state. And they've actually been in violation of their own cap. So a lot of school districts are having to pay fines for this. So the question becomes, I think for me, as we talk about this, how do we get past that issue? Obviously, Blaine is one example, but that's happening in many other places. And that's happening in our schools on the South Side, too. That even though maybe we don't have the numbers overall, but those class sizes are a problem. And we know, as you said before, that class size does matter. How do we deal with that? What can we do?
Well, Nick actually asked this specific question of our principal earlier about that. He said, well, how can you have 37 in a classroom? Isn't there a rule about that? And then you get down to this situation of is plucking a few students out and stuffing them in 7th grade, and then now there's too many. We could put those kids in 6th grade. I mean, kids aren't widgets, and so at some point you have to, like, what do? Do you bend the rule? What's better for the student? And now I think you should take it in what you guys have decided to do.
Yeah.
Well, Troy said that you're past the 32 students per teacher right now, right?
We go from that was an estimate, so I don't have an exact average. Sure. We have as few as 24 students in the classroom and as many as 37. Sure. The average, I would have to guesstimate. I haven't done those numbers yet. I would have to say it's somewhere between 30 and 32.
So why are parents wanting to go to this school then if it's so
because they're voting with their feet. I mean, it's that simple. They don't stop. A parent doesn't stop because it's overcrowded. They go because they think it's a quality school.
And so we've been able to do some
quality
things.
goes down when you have that ratio.
They're not going to stop coming for that reason.
Well, let me answer your question. I have a very specific answer to it. And so, what class size does make it less likely that your students, less likely that a teacher will be able to catch a student that might need that extra help, give that individual attention. We've been able to do some things at Blaine to mitigate that because we've been able to raise the funds outside of what we get from CPS to put additional people in place to do intervention with those students and to actively seek out and target those students for additional instruction. So over the past 2 years, because of that, we've actually gone from 79% meet standards in reading to 89%. We are the highest performing neighborhood school with no selective enrollment program in reading in the city. And we've been able to do that over the past 2 years because of that. But every school can't do that because they can't raise those funds.
Yeah, but it comes back to the
adjunct faculty is what you're doing.
Yes.
Well, they are. But it comes back to the economic question, right? It comes back to the economic issue, which is actually interesting because nationally this is happening as well. Unfortunately, nationally the trend is that many states are increasing their class sizes. So recently, California, Georgia, Ohio, Utah, Wisconsin, New York, they increased their class sizes. Idaho and Texas are considering doing it. So we have this issue, right? And if the communities that are doing this don't have the resources that Blaine has, then we're really in trouble. And it brings us back to poverty, and it brings us back to family support, and it brings us back to the same issues we come back to really every week on the show. You cannot negate the income inequality, and you cannot negate the role of family in all of this. So, as we talk about it, I'm really excited to hear about what you guys are doing. But I wonder, as you said, how can we apply that model other places? And can we?
Are there foundations, perhaps, that can assist some of the schools, maybe adopt a school and create a program like this?
But it shouldn't be their job,
No.
But they are.
It's not their job, but I think that if you have a successful corporation, that it is not only good business to give back to the community, it's good marketing.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah.
That is the case. It is just a sound investment. And I think it's a shame what's coming down here with these schools increasing their class sizes. It looks okay. Like, what's the downside to this? Oh, if we lose 2 percentage points in reading, but we save $8 million, it's worth it. Is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, it's better than not building a prison that we need or something. And I think that they're making these economic decisions, but we all know that there's only. You have to be smarter than everyone in the world to be economically feasible. Of course, it starts with education.
And the corporations, when they do, Gates Foundation included, when they do come in, their assistance isn't free. And what I mean is that they put their own ideological desires into the game. Yeah.
As well as their own computers.
And then there's the issue that education is a responsibility of the state, a responsibility of the municipality. We don't ask corporations to supplement our fire department or our police because that's our responsibility as a collective society, and schools are the exact same thing. And so the solution is not to try to shop that responsibility out to corporations, but to accept that responsibility as citizens and ensure that our government meets that responsibility by funding our schools appropriately.
How do you suggest we go about that? And by the way, it used to be fire departments were actually funded by insurance companies.
That's odd.
Yes, in fact, you can still see certain places in London and in parts of the United States where insurance companies basically were in charge of certain fire departments. That did change, just like the CTA was once made up of private companies. But getting back to education, so I think we all agree. How do you go about that?
And so the public has to be educated about it.
To do what? The public is
Is it an issue of
educated to
increasing
do
funding?
what?
Is that the fundamental
Funding.
issue?
Funding.
So for example, the state fund, Illinois has the lowest contribution toward public education of any state in the nation. When they created the existing funding formula, they had EFAB, the Education Fund Advisory Board. And the question that EFAB asked was, what level of funding is required to get 2/3 of all non-at-risk Illinois students at grade level? Not 2/3 of all students, not all students, not 2/3 of all students, but 2/3 of all non-at-risk students. That's how they set the funding formula for state funding, and they didn't even get that high. And so you set the funding formula in the beginning knowing that it was not enough to ensure that all students, particularly at-risk students, will meet grade level expectations. People have to be informed about this kind of thing. People have to be motivated. There has to be a community groundswell.
But where, let's assume that they are informed, that people are outraged. How does that get translated? What does that get translated into? Into raising an income tax,
solving the problem.
taxes?
However,
we do the property tax swap. We changed the funding formula.
Change the funding formula.
How
do we go about
We
doing
also
this?
have to empower. We have to empower people economically. I mean, at the end of the day, America is one place for folks who have money. It's a whole nother place for those that do not. And so even if we tinker with these formulas and we try to create this egalitarian society through the government, at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist system. And if we do not empower, say, the folks in the communities I live in and this community I work in, if we don't empower them economically, at the end of the day, these fixes are only temporary, because if they get through inequality in the education system, then they're going to face the inequality somewhere else that comes when you do not have money in the society. And I think, to me, we've got to talk about this holistically. So, great conversation, everyone. I thought, it was very, very good. We disagreed, which is good. It's good for TV, okay? And, our folks want to hear us. But also, I think that it's important that we have this holistic conversation. So thank you for bringing your experiences and your expertise, and we'll do this again sometime. That's our show for today. The conversation continues online at wycc.org. See you next time on The Professors.